Well, good afternoon, everyone. We've been dealing with post-colonialism, and in our last lecture, we understood how there was a revolution in literary theory during the 1960s, and it was a reaction against the earlier new criticism and structuralism. Post-colonialism is also known as the post-colonialist theory is also known as post-critics. And we also understood the term post-colonialism, which can be used either with hyphen or without hyphen. And when they are used with hyphen or without hyphen, they represent the same thing. They are acceptable, but there are slight differences that we need to understand in the theoretical assumptions. So post-colonialism, as we understood in yesterday's lecture, is a set of theories in philosophy and various approaches to literary analysis. Okay, so these particular approaches are concerned with literature written in English in countries that were or still are colonies of other countries. Yes, certain countries are still under the, for example, you might be knowing Algeria is under the rule of France, and many countries got their freedom only recently from the colonial powers. India, for example, got its freedom in 1947, and there are such other countries which got their freedom only recently. So the literature written in English in such countries is taken into consideration for analysis, and these studies do not consider the literature that represents either British or American viewpoints. And it concentrates on writings from colonialized or formerly colonized cultures in Australia, New Zealand, Africa, South America, and other such places, which were once dominated by but remained outside the white, male, European cultural, political, and philosophical tradition. These countries were also known as Third World or Commonwealth countries or nations, and post-colonialism was referred to as Third World or Commonwealth literature earlier. Now, this term is considered to be pejorative or insulting. So, these theories or post-colonialists try to investigate what happens when two cultures clash, and one of them, with its ideology, accessory ideology, empowers, dominates, and deems itself superior to the other. So, what happened in India under the British rule? So, that is being considered during that colonial period. Now, we shall focus on the historical development. There can be a question on such kind of things. Means when we talk about theoretical questions. So, questions can be asked on such points. When we refer to the historical development of post-colonialism, this colonial power and prejudice has its influence on it. So it has its roots in colonial power and prejudice, I can say. And it develops from a 4,000-year history of strained cultural relations between colonies in Africa and Asia and the Western world. So this post-colonialism develops from a 4,000-year history of strained cultural relations. And throughout this long history, the West became the colonizers. And many African and Asian countries and their peoples became the colonized. So we understand this difference between the colonizers, and colonized. West were the colonizers, and African and Asian countries and the people living in these countries were the colonized people. And during the 19th century, means we are not going into the 4,000 years history here. During the 19th century, Great Britain or UK, what we know as Britain popularly or England popularly, emerged as the largest colonizer and imperial power, and it gained control of almost one quarter of the Earth's landmass. Can you imagine? Even today, Britain's population is around 6 crores. Even today. And such a small nation, such a small country, dominated almost one quarter of the Earth's landmass. So, India is the nation with a population of what we call 150 billions, okay, millions, sorry, or what we call crores in terms of crore, 130 crores or 140 crores around now. But then time we were around 36 crores or so, 33 or 36 or less than that. But still, even today, the population of Great Britain is around 6 crores. And by the middle of the 19th century, terms such as colonial interests and the British Empire were widely used, both in the media and in government policies and international politics. Many British people believed that Great Britain was destined to rule the world. So this has to be underlined. British people thought that God Himself has sent them to rule the world. And likewise, the assumption that Western Europeans, especially France, Germany, etc., and in particular the British people, were biologically superior to any other race. Biologically, they considered that they were superior. They thought that. Okay. So, this is a term for a class of people based on physical, race is the term for a class of people based on physical and cultural distinctions. You need to understand the term race here. And the biological superiority of these people remained unquestioned relatively. And these kind of beliefs means the beliefs of British people, Europeans, directly affected the ways in which the colonizers treated the colonized. The people from the countries like India, means other African or Asian countries. So that particular feeling was superiority feeling was always there, and they dominated over the scenario with this kind of feeling. So they use its political and economic strength. The people of Great Britain or Great Britain itself, using this political and economic strength. Even today, the USA and other such countries try to do the same. But now the only difference is that other countries are not their colonies, but they treat these countries as their colonies itself. So, using its political and economic strength, Great Britain, which was the chief imperialist power, the central imperialist power of the 19th century, dominated her colonies, such as India and other Asian countries. So you know it very well. You must have studied it in history. These colonies, people from colonies or countries, were made to produce and then give up their country's raw materials in exchange for what material goods the colonized desired, or were made to believe they desired for the colonizers. So we know it very popular in Marathi. कच्चा माल पाठवला जायचा आणि पक्का माल इकडे आणला जायचा. So that is what happened. Apart from that, forced labor of the colonized became the rule of the day. Many of the people from Africa, Asia were taken to America, Brazil, etc., for tree plantation, for sugar cane plantation, etc. So the institution of slavery was commercialized during this period. Okay, you need to understand this. Forced labor of the colonized became the rule of the day, and the institutions of slavery was commercialized. And they justified their cruel treatment of the colonized by invoking European religious beliefs, missionaries, etc. Means, from their perspective, the peoples of Africa, the Americas, and Asia. Americas means both Latin and North America, Red Indians, etc. The natives, Americans, not the one now who are ruling over the USA. They were original Britishers. So the people of Africa, the Americas, and Asia were heathens, means possessing pagan ways that must be Christianized. They were barbaric, and these people were to be Christianized. That was the belief, perspective of many white Westerners. So, how these people are treated, that mattered a lot. And through this particular treatment, they maintained their superiority. The colonialist ideology. What was that ideology? That all races other than white were inferior or subhuman. Indian, for example, were called barbaric. Children, they were treated as children. They lacked adult qualities. And these subhumans, or even they use the term savages, quickly became the inferior and equally evil others. The term others is used. They were considered inferior and evil, not good, others. So this term, the others, is used, and from this, the positions of power are excluded. Means the people were excluded from the positions of power. They were treated as slaves because they were viewed as both different in terms of their color and inferior. So this is the scenario that we need to understand under post-colonialism. Post-colonial literature or post-colonial criticism tries to understand this through the literary analysis. Even in philosophy, such kind of things were there. And by the early 20th century, England's political, social, economic, and ideological domination of its colonies began to disappear. And this process is known as decolonization. Decolonization. For example, we got a freedom in 1947. India gained her independence from British colonial rule in the mid-century. So many scholars believe that this event marks the beginning of post-colonialism, India's independence. So that is the beginning, that is the mark of the beginning of the post-colonialism or third world studies. So this term, post-colonialism or third world studies, was coined by the French demographer Alfred Sauvy. When India received her independence, this colony was divided into two nations. You know it, the partition took place. The Indian Union and Pakistan. So this partitioning is named or called as the Great Divide, led to ethnic conflicts. The riots between Hindus and Muslims took place. Okay, between India and Pakistan. These were the British Commonwealth nations. Hundreds of thousands of people died in the struggle, and it ignited the outrage of vast array of scholars, writers, and critics regarding the social, political, moral, and economic conditions of the after effects of colonialism in the third world countries. They started thinking about the effects on all levels. So we can trace the beginnings of post-colonialism to the 1950s then. And with India's independence, this particular decade, 50s, witnessed the ending of France's long involvement in Indochina, the parting of the ways between the two leading figures in existential theories, Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. In literature, we can see that. Means there are differing views about Algeria. These two scholars were existentialist scholar, and after that, these two scholars had different views about Algeria, just now mentioned. Fidel Castro's now famous history shall absolve me. This is a speech. And the publication of Franz Fanon's Black Skin. He was the first post-colonial critic as such. His Black Skin, White Mask of 1952. And Chinua Achebe's novel Things Fall Apart. So all things happened during this decade. All these things. So these are the important happenings in the 1950s. And after that, in the following decades, the publication of additional key texts took place, which talked about the social, political, and economic conditions of various subaltern or marginalized subordinate groups. So in 1960, the Caribbean writer George Lamming published the book The Pleasures of Exile. In this text, he critiques William Shakespeare's play The Tempest from a post-colonial perspective. We should focus on these things. And Franz Fanon's book, The Rage of the Earth of 1961, highlights the tensions of binary oppositions of white versus black, good versus evil, and rich versus poor. So these are some of the themes that are dealt with in these books. Apart from that, post-colonialism gained the attention of Western countries with the publication of Edward Said's Orientalism in the year 1978, and Bill Ashcroft and others book monumental text The Empire Writes Back: Theory and Practice in Post-Colonial Literature in the year 1989. This book was a part of my MA syllabus. It's when I was a student. So I studied this particular book. So the publication of these two books, Orientalism and The Empire Writes Back, with the publication of these two books, the vices and the concerns of many subaltern cultures soon would be heard in both academic and social arenas. And the terms post-colonial and post-colonialism first appear in scholarly journals in the mid 1980s, and the subtitles such as which he used for their book, the term became very prominent during this period. So here are some more books that are referred here. So this is how we understand how post-colonialism came into being. And many of the scholars of post-colonialism, they suggest there are two branches of post-colonialism. The first views post-colonialism as a set of diverse methodologies that possess no unitary quality. This group includes Homi K. Bhabha and Arun P. Mukherjee. So they had this first view of colonialism, post-colonialism. And the second branch includes those critics such as Edward Said, Barbara Harlow, and Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, who view post-colonialism as a set of cultural strategies centered in history. You need to understand these two branches of post-colonialism. The second branch can also be subdivided into those who believe post-colonialism refers to that period after the colonized countries have gained their independence, as opposed to again those who regard post-colonialism as referring to all the characteristics of a society or a culture from the time of colonization to the present moment, means almost from 4,000 years. So one group thinks that post-colonialism refers to the period after these countries, for example, India got its independence, and so there is one more group which believes that all the characteristics of society or culture from the time of colonization, means in historical colonization to the present moment, can be considered as post-colonialism. So this is the divide. So this is the divide in views, in perception. Okay. So we have to understand post-colonialism under this context. So many colonized countries, respond to changes in language, curriculum matters in education, race differences, economic issues, morals, ethics, and many other concerns. Even the act of writing itself is challenged. So all these factors become the context for the evolving theories and practices of post-colonialism. Okay, this is what we understand by post-colonialism.